just sang. It was beautiful. Thank you for joining in. And thank you for being present here this morning. I don't know what you thought when you heard about a memorial service at a homecoming reunion. We don't always associate the two. But perhaps it's mainly as we grow older that we begin to accept that death is a part of the celebration of life. Peter Gomes has said that the essence of a reunion is the connection between the living and the dead. So the space we share here this morning is sacred because of the proximity between the living and the dead. And our presence here as a community is our act of proclamation, of worship, of faithfulness to the generations past and the generations to come. And your presence here is an act of love and gratitude for those who cannot be here embodied today. This past week, an alumnus spoke in chapel, and she pointed to all the places in the chapel that she sat during her years at Dock. And I've heard this said by almost every alumnus who returns. They can name memories of specific places on campus, in part because significant things happened there. These memories are still alive and operative for us today. And I'm deeply encouraged when you alumni come back and speak of how this place empowered you to be participants in God's good and creative work in our world. Homecomings are a remembering place, and I'm sure today there will be much remembering going on in the hallways and classrooms and outdoors. I think in a world of constant transience, we yearn for a sense of rootedness, of belonging, of home. A place where we are remembered as we are. Being fully known, our entire story, I think is one of our deepest desires. Now granted, some of us are remembered for things we did in high school that are better forgotten. And in my short time here, I've heard plenty of those stories. And truly, maybe one of the most important aspects of right remembering is a holy forgetting. But we remember this place so intensely because such growth and transformation happened here. This place reminds you of the tender days of your youth as you developed in mind, body, and spirit. Memories of fun and pain as you matured together. This is where we first fell in love, either with that dark-haired upperclassman, or that subject matter that sparked life passion, or that song and choir that carried us away to a new place. Here in this place, we encountered ourselves and each other, building identities that would affect us in profound ways. We may have experienced deep love here in being fully known and accepted for who we are, and conversely, we may have experienced deep hurt in being misunderstood and feeling alone. So our journeys back to this place maybe are as varied as the colors and patterns of this silk painting. And maybe we don't recognize ourselves from the person we were when we threw that graduation cap in the air. We have changed. And for many of us, our encounter with death has changed us in profound ways. And I wonder if our journey to high school reunions is a desire to reconcile with our younger self, as Janie mentioned earlier. I wonder if we long to find a way to embrace our 16-year-old self, filled with such hope and fear and wonder and questions. What would we say to our younger self if we had the opportunity? How would we retell our story if we knew then what we know now? These kind of events can help us re-narrate our lives. We get to fill in the missing pieces, gain a new perspective, change our view of someone, seek or receive forgiveness, or redeem an event that was given up for lost. This is what the resurrection is all about. Recently, I embarked on a project of going through my father's extensive slide collection, some 5,000, converting them into digital format. And I'm doing this in part because he's experiencing significant cognitive decline, and he's not the same person that he was. So I want to remember him. And my 4- and 3-year-old daughters have enjoyed seeing photos of me when I was their age. And as I've gone through these slides, this project has been a revelation for me. It has become a redeeming practice as a new story of my Father, and his relationship to me is revealed in these grainy slides that I do not remember. When I see him on all fours with me and my brothers piled on his back, I see in his eyes a familiar look. It is the one I share when my girls are piled on my back, one of deep love and joy in my children. And I also see in his eyes a wondering if my back will survive this abuse. I think one of the gifts of remembering with each other here today, sharing snapshots of life, is the broader narrative we gain. How we remember is vital to our ongoing health and faith. One of the constant refrains that you will find in the biblical narrative is that of right remembering, and remembering the places that God showed up. In some ways, I think of this memorial service in the words of that familiar hymn, Come Thou Fount, as our effort to raise our Ebenezer. As a child, I was always amused whenever we sang in that second verse, Here I raise my Ebenezer, and I would sing this with gusto, because I had no idea what an Ebenezer was, even if I had one, or how I would raise one up. Of course, this comes from the story of Samuel and the people of Israel after they were rescued in their time of trouble and fear. And Samuel erects a stone and names it Ebenezer, Stone of Help, as a visual reminder of the place where God's restoration began. And so as the people would move on with their lives, the stone would stand there visible to all who passed that way as a reminder that God's mercies are everlasting, God's covenant is forever. And of course, in the biblical narrative, another more beautiful representation of God's remembrance of us is that of the rainbow, the great storm. We are a people of a God who remembers, who reveals through story and history. And we need to tell our stories. We need to keep alive the stories of the saints going on before us. We are all at different places in our remembering and our experiences of God in times of trouble and death. We share doubts, we share questions. But I think a good remembering binds us together more fully and honestly as a community within the larger family of God. I think sometimes our memories are stitched together like a crazy quilt. The pieces may or may not be beautiful in and of themselves, but together they form an intricate and complex tapestry. Each one of you holds different pieces of a puzzle, and my prayer is that there is some serendipitous fitting of pieces today as you share your stories. And as much as one person or another is sharing a personal story, all of this is our story as God's people. This past week there was a tragic death of a teenager in the community, a student at another high school. And from what I have seen, I am encouraged by the open support of the community, and particularly the youth, as they try to discern ways to deal with their grief and loss in a public way. There is no exact manual on how to handle life when it turns so sharply in loss and death. And traumatic events oftentimes have a way of paralyzing us. We may move on in body, but feel like we are leaving behind a significant piece of ourselves. And so we float through time and space, unsure of where the shifting winds of grief will land us. We are filled with questions and doubts belonging to no easy answers. But I trust and hope that one of the graces of growing older, and I think this is mostly a graying crowd, there's a few young ones among us, but I trust and hope that one of the graces of growing older is the increased capacity to interpret and frame experiences of loss in meaningful ways. I do have a sense that we need to attend more funerals and memorial services, because I think they are helpful spiritual practices. They can help focus life on what is most important. In these events, we are given an opportunity to transform our grief into a tribute, a memorial that is redemptive, reaching outward. In God's timing, healing will happen in a variety of ways, whether through a song, a hand held in comfort, a slideshow, a word spoken in tenderness, or that silent, wordless refrain of God's grace that slips in unnoticed when our fences are down. In the Beatitudes it says, "Blessed are those who mourn." I think our expression of grief and sorrow gives voice to the not yet of God's sweeping and grand story of redemption. The time you and I are granted here on earth may never be enough to heal our deepest sorrows. There is always that longing for the day when death will be no more, when God will wipe away every tear. Then we will be whole. Then we will know God's full presence with us. The good news is that in the meantime, we are not left alone. God has suffered with us. God has given us the Comforter. And God has given us each other as companions on this journey. Ted Swartz, in his new book, Laughter is Sacred Space, reflects that in this life there is grace, but never enough. There is peace, but never enough. There is love, but never enough. But we take what we have, which is never enough, and we break it, and we pass it out. So we remember. We share the life and peace of Christ, the bread and fruit of the vine. Each person named here today is a reminder of God's gracious presence with us. And I invite you to consider the ways in which your classmate, your beloved friend, your family member help reveal God's steadfast love to you. And as you remember what still needs healing and grace, maybe there is a memory of conflict or hurt, I invite you to use this time to ask for God's restoration. Or maybe we need to forgive ourselves, or we sense that we need to release something or someone into the tender mercies of God. In the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus says, "Remember, I am with you always to the end of the earth, to the end of the age." God will never quit on us out of weariness, or give up on us out of frustration, or desert us when we feel stuck in time and place. God remembers us and remembers each person we will name today. So may our spirits be awoken with devout thanksgiving and gratitude for our friends, our family, our classmates, the old and the new, those gone before us and those here today. I'll end here with this prayer from Cardinal John Henry Newman. O Lord, support us all the day long, until the shadows lengthen and the evening comes, and the busy world is hushed, and the fever of life is over, and our work is done. Then, in your mercy,